Welcome back to Darkling Fables, my friends. Turn down the lights and settle in, because tonight, I'm taking you into one of the most chilling mysteries of the 20th century. What I'm about to share isn't fiction. Every unsettling detail comes from documented evidence, official investigations, and witness accounts. The story I'm about to tell has haunted me ever since I first discovered it. 9 experienced hikers ventured into the Ural Mountains of Russia in the dead of winter, 1959. None survived. But it's not the fact they died that keeps investigators and amateur sleuths awake at night. It's the horrifying manner of their deaths and the inexplicable circumstances surrounding them. Some say it was an avalanche. Others point to military testing. Some even suggest extraterrestrial involvement. But after nearly 7 decades, no nation fully accounts for the bizarre evidence found at the scene. Before we begin this journey together, I want to warn you. What you're about to hear contains disturbing details. This isn't a campfire ghost story. This is the Dyatlov Pass Incident, one of history's most disturbing, unsolved mysteries. And after hearing it, you might never look at the wilderness the same way again. In late January 1959, a group of 10 young men and women, all experienced hikers and cross-country skiers from the Ural Polytechnic Institute, embarked on a challenging expedition into the northern Ural Mountains. Led by 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov, they sought to reach Otorten Mountain, a difficult Category 3 hike, especially in the harshness of the Siberian winter. Yuri Yudin, one of the original 10, fell ill with severe joint pain during the journey's early stages. On January 28th, with great reluctance, he turned back at the village of Vizhai, the last settlement before the wilderness. It was a decision that would save his life and haunt him forever. As he bid farewell to his friends at the edge into the vast whiteness, Yudin couldn't have known he was the last person who would ever see them alive. The 9 who continued were not amateur thrill seekers. They were skilled outdoor enthusiasts with significant mountain experience. Igor Dyatlov, the meticulous leader. Zinaida Kolmogorova, a capable mountaineer. Ludmila Dubinina, known for her spirited nature. Alexander Kolovatov, a thoughtful physicist. Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko, both strong and reliable. Nikolai Fibo-Brignol, the group's resident joker. Rustam Slobodin, an experienced ski tourer. And Semyon Zolotaryov, the oldest at 38 and a veteran of World War II. According to their itinerary, the group should have reached their destination by February 12th, with a telegram confirming their return to Vizhai, expected that same day. With a telegram confirming their return to Vizhai, expected that same day. When February 12th passed without word, there was initially little concern. Delays were common in such expeditions, especially in winter conditions. But by February 20th, with no communication, families demanded action. A search party was dispatched, consisting first of volunteer students and teachers from the Hikers University, later joined by military personnel and regional police. The searchers followed the group's trail through heavy snow, tracking their path through forests and up toward the slopes of Kolatsiakal, a name that in the local Mansi language translates ominously to Dead Mountain. On February 26th, they made their first grim discovery. The team found the hikers' abandoned tent on the eastern slope of Kolatsiakal. This immediately struck the searchers as bizarre. The location made little sense. The group had set up camp on an exposed mountainside when more sheltered areas were available, just a few hundred meters below in the forested valley. More disturbing still was the condition of the tent. It was torn open from the inside. Not unzipped, cut open, as though the occupants had been in such desperate haste to escape that they couldn't use the entrance. Inside, the scene was even more perplexing. All the hikers' belongings were neatly arranged, boots lined up, backpacks organized, food and supplies laid out for cooking. A camera on a tripod stood ready. It appeared as though the group had been preparing an evening meal when something terrifying enough to make them flee into the sub-zero night had occurred. Most disturbing of all, many of the hikers' shoes remained in the tent. Whatever had driven them to slash their way out had been urgent enough that they fled barefoot or in socks into snow, where temperatures hovered around minus 30 degrees Celsius, negative 22 Fahrenheit. The search party followed tracks leading from the tent down toward the forest edge. Under a large cedar tree at the forest boundary, they found the first bodies. Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Krivonishenko lay frozen beside the remains of a small fire. Both were shoeless and dressed only in underwear and shirts. Branches on the cedar were broken up to 5 meters high, suggesting someone had climbed it, perhaps to look for something, or to hide from something. Between the cedar and the tent, 3 more bodies were Slobodin. Their positions suggested they had been attempting to return to the tent when they succumbed to the cold. They were separated by distances of 300, 480, and 630 meters from the cedar tree. It took more than 2 months to locate the remaining 4 hikers. Not until May 4th, when the spring thaw had begun to melt the deep snow, did searchers find them in a ravine under 4 meters of snow, 75 meters from the cedar tree. And it was these final victims that transformed a tragic winter accident into something far more sinister. Lyudmila Dubinina, Alexander Kolevatov, Nikolai Thibault-Brignot, and Semyon Zolotaryov had suffered catastrophic injuries that defied explanation. Nikolai's skull had been crushed with a force that doctors compared to being hit by a car. Lyudmila and Semyon had major chest fractures that would have required force equivalent to a direct hit from a high-speed vehicle. Yet there were no corresponding external wounds. Most ghoulishly of all, Lyudmila was missing her tongue, eyes, and part of her facial tissue. The official medical examiner noted, the force of the blows had been so powerful that the victim's ribs had been cracked and fractured, driving bone fragments into their internal organs. Yet incredibly, despite these massive internal injuries, there was no sign of external trauma. No cuts, no bruises, something the experienced pathologist had never seen before in his extensive career. The Soviet authorities quickly closed the case, attributing the deaths to a compelling natural force. The area was sealed off for years. The official investigation documents were archived and classified. For decades, the case languished in obscurity, known only to locals and a few investigators haunted by its unsolved questions. But as Soviet restrictions loosened, details began to emerge that only deepened the mystery. The hikers' recovered diaries and camera films revealed nothing unusual until the day before their deaths. Their final photographs showed a cheerful group setting up camp and preparing for what they thought would be just another night on the trail. There were no mentions of being followed, no signs of conflict within the group, no indications of fear, until something made them cut their way out of their tent and run barefoot into lethal cold. What do something so contrary to all their training? What could be more frightening than the certainty of freezing to death? Multiple investigations have been launched in the decades since, with theories ranging from the plausible to the fantastical. An avalanche could explain the sudden panic, but not the lack of avalanche debris, the injuries to the bodies, were why the experienced hikers would set up camp on an exposed slope. Military testing in the area might account for some strange elements, but not the hikers' behavior of fleeing rather than seeking shelter. Infrasound wind phenomena, where specific mountain shapes create disorienting, fear-inducing vibrations, could explain the panic, but not the injuries. The indigenous Mansi people had legends of spirits that guarded the mountain, but they themselves were quickly ruled out as suspects. People had legends of spirits that guarded the mountain, but they themselves were quickly ruled out as suspects. The hikers' injuries weren't consistent with human attacks, and there were no other footprints found near the camp. In February 1959, at the height of the Cold War, the region around Otorten Mountain was rife with secret Soviet military activity. Several witnesses, including other hikers in the area, reported seeing strange orange spheres in the sky that night. Radiation levels on some of the retrieved clothing measured significantly higher than normal background levels. One of the most enduring and chilling pieces of evidence comes from another hiking group that was approximately 50 kilometers south of the Dyatlov group that night. They photographed strange orange lights in the northern sky. In the Kolat-Syakhl, at the approximate time the Dyatlov group would have been making their desperate escape from the tent. Lev Ivanov, the lead investigator initially assigned to the case, maintained public silence for decades. But in 1990, as the Soviet Union crumbled, he finally spoke out, admitting that he had been pressured to close the case and exclude evidence of flying spheres from his official report. I suspected at the time, and am almost certain now, that the hikers were the victims of a secret military test. He confessed in an interview shortly before his death. Yuri Yudin, the hiker who turned back due to illness and thus became the sole survivor, spent the rest of his life searching for answers about his friend's fate. He was permitted to identify their personal effects after their bodies were recovered. I didn't recognize their faces, he would later say. They were missing or covered in ice or severely discolored, but I knew their clothing. I knew who wore what. Yudin noticed something strange that even the investigators had missed. Some of the hikers were wearing clothes that belonged to others. Zolotaryov was wearing Dubinina's faux fur coat and hat, while Dubinina had on Krivonishenko's wool sweater. This suggested that some of them had been alive after the initial incident, conscious enough to take clothes from the dead to try to survive. In the 1990s, when the Soviet archives became more accessible, researchers discovered that the initial search parties had found the tent relatively quickly, but their discoveries were not publicized. There were reports of additional bodies, 11 rather than 9, briefly mentioned in early communications before being redacted from official records. The area had been home to a number of gulag labor camps in the Stalin era, with thousands of prisoners working and dying in the harsh conditions. Some researchers suggest that escaped prisoners might have encountered the hikers, though this fails to explain the nature of the injuries or why nothing was stolen from the tent. In 2019, Russian authorities reopened the investigation, acknowledging the enduring public interest in the case. Their conclusion, released in July 2020, suggested an avalanche as the most likely cause, combined with poor visibility that prevented the hikers from finding their way back to their tent after fleeing. But this explanation still fails to account for numerous inconsistencies. The slope was not steep enough for a typical avalanche. No avalanche debris was found. The chest injuries were unlike typical compression injuries seen in avalanche victims. And perhaps most tellingly, the hikers' footprints leading away from the tent were still visible when the search party arrived. They had not been covered by any significant snowfall or avalanche in the intervening weeks. Perhaps most chilling is what was found in the hiker's own camera, specifically in the final frame of film retrieved from the snow. The last photograph taken by the group shows nothing but darkness, with a strange glowing object just barely visible at the edge of the frame. Photo analysis in subsequent decades revealed this object was not a flaw in the film, but something emitting it had tried to capture on film in their final hours. Yevgeny Okashev, a search volunteer who later became obsessed with the case, managed to interview an elderly Mansi hunter in the 1970s who claimed his father had warned him never to camp on Kholat Syakhl. "There is a place where the earth breathes," the hunter said, using a phrase that didn't translate well but seemed to refer to periodic releases of gas from beneath the mountain. Whether this was referring to natural methane vents or something else remains unclear. Another disturbing element emerged in the early 2000s when Mikhail Sharavin, one of the student volunteers in the original search party, finally spoke publicly about what he had witnessed. "When we found the tent, it was not just cut. It was shredded in places," he recounted, "and there were, I don't know how to say it, impressions in the snow around it, like something very heavy had been moving around the tent before the hikers cut their way out." What makes the Dyatlov Pass incident uniquely disturbing is how it systematically eliminates simple explanations. Each theory accounts for some elements but fails to explain others. An avalanche might explain the panic, but not the radiation or the injuries. A military accident might explain the government's secrecy, but not why the hikers fled instead of negotiating. Even exotic explanations like infrasound-induced panic fail to account for the full spectrum of evidence. The enduring power of this case lies in its resistance to resolution. It feels as though It feels as though we are missing some crucial piece of information, or that the truth combines elements from multiple theories in a way we haven't yet imagined. In the end, we're left with 9 young lives cut short in circumstances of unfathomable terror. Whatever they encountered that February night was horrifying enough to make them tear through their own tent and flee barefoot into lethal cold rather than face it. Some of them managed to start a fire. Some tried desperately to return to their tent. Others suffered injuries that medical science struggles to explain. And somewhere on that remote mountainside, now officially renamed Dyatlov Pass in their memory, still be waiting, the area has become a pilgrimage site for those fascinated by the mystery, despite its remote location and the challenging journey required to reach it. Wooden crosses and a simple monument now mark the location where the tent was found. Visitors report an unnatural stillness there, a heavy silence that seems to swallow sound. Many describe an inexplicable sense of dread that comes over them as they approach the site, a feeling that they are being watched or that something unseen is moving just at the periphery of their vision. In 2008, a group of hikers camping near the pass reported being awakened by what they described as lights moving under the snow, glowing orbs that appeared to travel beneath the surface before disappearing. They abandoned their expedition the next morning. Yuri Kuntsevich, who as a child had attended the funerals of the Dyatlov hikers and later founded a foundation dedicated to investigating their deaths, has collected hundreds of anomalous reports from the area. "There is something there," he insists. "Something the Soviet authorities knew about but couldn't control or didn't understand. One of the most compelling theories to emerge in recent years centers on Soviet military tests of radiological weapons or rocket fuel components. The radiation found on the clothing, the strange lights in the sky, and the government's eagerness to close the case all point in this direction. If the hikers witnessed a failed weapons test, they might have been exposed to chemical agents that induced panic or hallucinatory internal injuries later discovered. This would explain the lack of external trauma despite massive internal damage. Certain chemical weapons and radiation effects can cause internal hemorrhaging without breaking the skin. It would also explain why some victims showed signs of radiation while others did not, and why strange orange lights were seen in the sky that night. Another detail, often overlooked: the 4 hikers found in the ravine had apparently survived long enough to not just take clothing from their dead comrades, but to create a rudimentary shelter. They had lined the ravine floor with small branches before lying down, suggesting they retained enough presence of mind for basic survival tactics. Yet something had prevented them from making a larger fire or attempting to return to civilization. Whether injury, Alexei Kaigorodov, a geologist who studied the pass area in the 1980s, noted unusual magnetic anomalies that could potentially disorient hikers and cause compasses to malfunction. Combined with the frequent blizzard conditions and sudden weather changes common in the area, this could create a perfect storm of disorientation. But, he admitted, that doesn't explain why they cut the tent from the inside. That speaks to immediate, overwhelming fear. Perhaps most disturbing is the condition of the bodies themselves. Modern forensic experts who have reviewed the original autopsy photographs note that the discoloration of the skin on several victims is consistent with exposure to high levels of radiation or certain toxic chemicals. The orange-reddish hue described in the autopsies is similar to effects seen in other radiation exposure cases. The missing tongue and facial tissues of Lyudmila Dubinina, while often sensationalized in retellings, may have a more prosaic explanation: scavenging animals or decomposition in the running water of the ravine where she was found. But other elements of her injuries remain inexplicable, particularly the crushing chest trauma without external wounds. In 2014, a small piece of metal was discovered embedded in bone fragment samples that had been preserved from the original autopsies. Analysis suggested it was an alloy used in experimental Soviet aircraft of the period. Was this evidence of a collision with some test vehicle or debris from an aerial test? The Russian government has neither confirmed nor denied the finding. The diary of Zinaida Kolmogorova contains an entry from January 31st, their last normal day. We know the Otorten awaits us tomorrow. Even Zolotaryov, who is usually so calm, is excited to reach it. Igor says we should camp early tonight to prepare for the final ascent. Nothing in her words suggests any awareness of danger or fear. They were simply excited young adventurers on the verge of completing a challenging journey. What transformed their normal expedition into one of history's most disturbing mysteries in the span of less than 24 hours? The search for answers continues. Every year, new expeditions visit the pass, new researchers comb through the evidence, and new theories emerge. The Russian government periodically comb through the evidence, and new theories emerge. The Russian government periodically releases additional documents from the original investigation, though many suspect the most crucial files remain classified. In the absence of definitive answers, the 9 hikers have become almost mythological figures, young lives frozen forever in the moment of their unexplained terror. their story a warning about the dangers lurking in remote places. As Yuri Yudin, the sole survivor who turned back before the incident, said shortly before his death in 2013, "I've lived all these years with the feeling that I should have been with them. But if I had been, there would have been 10 bodies, not 9, and still no one to tell what happened on the mountain. Whatever they encountered, it didn't want witnesses. The snow has long since covered their foot by terrified hands have disintegrated. But the question remains, hanging over the pass that now bears Dyatlov's name. What force could be so terrifying that the only rational response was to cut your way out of shelter and run barefoot into the killing cold of a Siberian winter night? Perhaps we'll never know, or perhaps, someday, the mountain will give up its final secrets, and we'll learn what really happened to those 9 brave young people who ventured into the wilderness and encountered something beyond our understanding. Until then, the Dyatlov Pass Incident remains one of history's most disturbing unsolved mysteries. A stark reminder that even in our modern world, there are still dark corners where the unexplainable waits and questions that may be better left unanswered. And 9 hikers of Dyatlov Pass never returned to tell their story, but their legacy lives on in the questions they left behind. Sometimes I wonder if the truth is already out there, hidden in plain sight among the competing theories and classified documents. What do you think happened on that mountain? Was it something mundane, an avalanche, a military accident, or something more inexplicable? I'd love to hear your theories in the comments below. If this exploration of one of history's darkest mysteries fascinated you, please consider subscribing to Darkling Fables. Each week, we delve into true stories that challenge our understanding of reality. From unsolved mysteries to historical events stranger than fiction. Hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next journey into the unknown. It's a good mystery. Share this video with them. Perhaps together, we might shed new light on old shadows. Until next time, remember, sometimes the most terrifying stories are the ones that actually happened.